So in the case of individual coverage, if the total cost is around $7,400 and your employer pays, say, $6,200, and then you pay around $1,200, now that's thousands of dollars more that everyday people could be saving per year if it weren't going directly to insurance companies' private profits, correct?
Yes.
Interesting. So one of the things that we're really seeing here is that the potential to moving to a Medicare for all system could actually give people a raise in many circumstances.
That is, of course, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talking there about Medicare for all during the ongoing right now House Oversight Committee hearings on Medicare for all. We wanted to make sure that we spotlighted this because there's a very good chance you might not even know that these are going on and that they are making the case once again in the House for Medicare for all. Not only AOC, but there's been some great questioning, great advocacy from, for instance, Cori Bush. She co-chaired the hearing, by the way, saying that, quote, Americans deserve a healthcare system that guarantees health and medical services to all. Congress must implement a system that prioritizes people over profits, humanity over greed, and compassion over exploitation. And I am glad that they are doing this, not only because it's an incredibly popular policy, the groundwork in terms of persuasion of the public has already been done, it's already successful. And it's not only so needed, considering how bad of a situation we were in terms of healthcare and insurance pre-pandemic, and it's hardly gotten better during that time. But also, it's evidence that despite the fact that Joe Biden seems to have been asleep for the past few months, and most of the Democrats, especially the Senate, I literally cannot tell you the last thing that they did. There are elected representatives who care about solving these problems, Jordan, and so it's good to occasionally get a reminder of that.
Right, I just remember during the primary how Bernie's conversation and platform around Medicare for all was treated as unreasonable, unrealistic, too expensive, whatever, despite every other developed nation in the world having a universal healthcare system. So Biden said, look, I'm gonna do something, but I'm gonna do a public option. That was what they hammered the entire time. I've compiled a supercut of every time he talked about a public option during the campaign. I tweeted it out a couple months ago. And as soon as he got the nomination, as soon as he got it, as soon as he won the election, he never mentioned it again. So this was never out of an actual preference for a different policy. This was just to kill this momentum because they had the support of the health insurance companies, glorified middlemen who are treated as essential services in the healthcare system. No, it's not. That's just something that makes your costs go up. That's it. That's like literally their role because they're there to profiteer. And he never mentioned it again, and we haven't heard about it since. So good job, America.
Yeah, and it wasn't what we wanted then, by the way. It was like a half measure or a quarter measure or a 10th measure. And then they just moved on. And that largely is what I want to talk about now. You have some in the party, still a minority, the most important, most passionate, most energetic, portion of the entire party, but still a very small minority that actually believe that you're supposed to get elected to accomplish things that would not only fulfill the ethical obligation you have to your representatives to make good on the promises that you've made and to actually represent them in these areas on policies that are incredibly popular, but also pragmatically, there's a lot of elections in America. There's one coming up right now, actually. They're periodic. There's the midterm elections, and the Democrats' strategy is, I don't know, sorry, I blanked for a second. I have no idea why they think someone would be like, in a good couple of years, I want more of this strategy. Only potentially by comparison to the alternative, which is apocalyptic, which we'll get to. But while they're trying to reassure people that they feel their pain when it comes to the high cost of insurance and all that, the Democrats are doing basically nothing. And there are people who are worried, including Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who just did an interview where she said, among other things, if the president does pursue and start to govern decisively using executive action and other tools at his disposal, I think we're in the game. But if we decide to just kind of sit back for the rest of the year and not change people's lives, yeah, I do think we're in trouble. And this is not a hypothetical. We're months and months and months into exactly that. In pursuit of not wanting to seem like you're doing too much, that you're FDR 2.0, that you're a radical or a socialist or whatever. You don't want to turn off those independents or whatever. Well, that's all BS. It's always been BS. And she identifies that saying, we need to acknowledge that this isn't just about middle of the road, an increasingly narrow band of independent voters. This is really about the collapse of support among young people, among the Democratic base, who are feeling that they worked overtime to get this president elected and aren't necessarily being seen. Young voters is a great group to identify in that group. I would say basically every non-white, centrist liberal voting bloc as well. Jordan, what do you think about this? This is, I feel like she's articulating a lot of the fears that we have.
Absolutely. In 2018, the biggest driver of Dem energy in the election was around healthcare, because we were on the heels of Trump's attacks on the Affordable Care Act, which could have caused millions of people to lose health insurance. People remembered that. It impacted them directly. So they showed up to vote, and it was a hugely successful narrative. And now here we are, having done nothing more to address that problem, let it language, and I think we'll get into later, it could get worse right before the election. And we just have nothing in response. The other two that are especially felt by young people are wages and housing. And what are we doing on that? Oh, sorry, and student debt. And we couldn't raise the minimum wage because Biden's strategy, which is appealing and reaching across the aisle, appealing to moderates, working in a bipartisan way to do it, failed. Manchin and Sinema killed it. And student debt, which he could do immediately whenever he wants with the stroke of a pen, and they won't do it. And then the cost of housing, we're seeing more and more people are being displaced. More and more people are seeing huge spikes in rent, and we have no solution on how to fix that. So all of these issues that impact people in a material way, there is no response from Democrats. That's something they would feel immediately. The infrastructure bill, which is their only real accomplishment, isn't going to help address those issues. And they severed it from the reconciliation bill, the Build Back Better bill, to try to get moderate support and pass infrastructure, and just took their word for it, thinking they would come back and vote for it. And they didn't. And progressives told them as it was happening, this isn't going to work. They're not gonna come back around and vote for your bill. And sure enough, here we are. So they have nothing now to run on.
Yeah, she identified it. Not as you said, as it was happening, but also in advance of it happening. That's why they did the 2-track thing in the first place. They knew that the football was gonna be pulled away. By the way, thankfully in this article in Intelligencer, they identify that she and the few progressives that voted against it were right to. The eventual bill was killed. And she identifies sort of the game that's being played in terms of courting these moderates, like trying to appeal to Manchin's sense of reason or justice or cinema or whatever, as if they're humans. As if they're humans that can be persuaded on these things, as if they're not just looking at the balance sheet on their donations. She said, I just felt like we called 2 different plays on this one about that strategy. I think there's a sense among more senior members of Congress that we can get back to this time of buddy and backslapping, and we'll cut a deal and go to a room with some bourbon and some smoke, and you'll come out and work something out. I think there's a real nostalgia and a belief that that time still exists, or that we can get back to that. She goes on to say, I was never under the illusion that we can bring Manchin along. And why would you be? And honestly, we're not done with this game. We were talking last week about Manchin coming out and saying, no, I'm like totally good on like actually still doing a reconciliation bill. In fact, I want it to be focused on climate. I'm gonna give you $500 billion to deal with climate. And so you see the football being placed and being positioned, and we're supposed to run towards it with headlines like, he launches a new push for all of the above energy bill, which already sounds bad, by the way. All of the above includes a lot of absolute trash. But you should know that he also this month hired a natural gas industry lobbyist to work for the Senate's Energy and Natural Resources Committee. CJ Osmond spent nearly 6 years at the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America, most recently as its literal top lobbyist. But no, I'm sure we're just like 1, maybe 2 lunches away from getting him on board in terms of doing something serious to deal with the climate. So Jordan, I want your response on that, but also what we alluded to earlier. There's a great article right now up on The Prospect by John Walker about Democrats creating effectively their own October surprise. And what this is about is previously there had been subsidies for the ACA. Those, as it stands right now, because the reconciliation bill didn't happen and the Democrats have all crawled into their coffin, they've been asleep for months. As of right now, those are going to end right before the election. People are gonna be millions of people are gonna be thrown off of their insurance coverage. Many more, millions more are gonna have skyrocketing premiums, potentially doubling right before the election. In addition to having to restart paying their student loans and losing the child tax credit, and there's no funding for COVID aid and all that stuff, and for getting rid of the rental, the eviction moratorium and all of that foreclosure moratorium. They're like setting it up perfectly, Jordan, to get absolutely walloped in this election.
I mean, at what point do we start to question, do they just want to lose? Because there are things like student debt that they could easily rectify. That freeing up $1.6 trillion in debt from millions of Americans would be life-changing. People would start to be able to buy homes. People would be able to buy cars. They'd have more discretionary income that they could spend. That is a driver of economic growth. If you're worried about an economy and a recovery, that's one way to free up a ton of middle-class spending. So why won't you do that? That's because they're beholden to, private interests and corporate interests. They're getting a ton of pressure from servicers, from private companies who have a vested stake in making sure these people stay in debt. And when you are in that situation, you're more reliant on inadequate jobs because you need something to be able to pay off these bills.
Yeah.
And this story from The Prospect, I read right before we started, and it put me in such a down mood, which I know is a break from my usual mood. But this is
usually, I'd say jolly.
Yeah, totally. But this is like, how this is so obviously a bad thing. It's just we're watching the iceberg just like slowly get closer and closer, and everyone's like, there's nothing we can do. Sorry, but it's another reminder of how this strategy of appealing to moderates isn't going to work, because it was initially in Build Back Better, the reconciliation bill, and Manchin killed it. And what's in it for him? Why would he extend it? So this is awful, and I saw it could kick 3 or so million people off of insurance, and then another 14 million could effectively see their premiums on marketplace plans just double, huge spikes. This is horrific.
On top of all of the other inflation that they already know people are worried about. You know what moderates like? The health coverage is staying in their house. They like these sorts of things. Maybe look into it. If the Dems actually wanted to win, and that was the most important thing to them, not all of the actual stuff with their donors and becoming lobbyists after they leave office and all that, it would be comically easy for Democrats to have all political power in this country forever. We already know everything they need to do. They just don't want to do it. For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.